Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Kamma Daf Samachay, Bava Kamma 65. Today's Daf Yomi is dedicated for a Shmira for all of Am Yisrael, for Atzoah, for the Shvuyim, for Hashem to protect the Chayalim in this difficult period. So today's Daf Yomi, we're going to start on Samach Beis, on Samach Hey Amud Aleph. This is the Daf Yomi for Shabbos Kodesh. And we're going to start on 65a, 4 lines from the top. Gemara tells us that Gufa, we're going to harken back to an earlier discussion that Amar Rav taught Karen that if Ke'ain Sheganav, that when the thief comes to pay back the principal, that principal of what he stole is valued at the time of the theft. So the Karen is Ke'ain Sheganav. Whereas the Tashlumei Kefil, if a person steals something, he has a second payment. The second payment, the Tashlumei Arba V'Chamisha, or if he steals an ox or a sheep, where he would pay 5 or 4 times the amount, that's Kishas Hamada Badin. That second payment, or that 4 or 5 times payment, that is not determined. The value, excuse me for a second. Hold on 1 second. That payment, that value is not determined from the moment of the theft, but that's determined by the moment that one stands in front of the court and has to address the claim. My time in the Rav, what's the reasoning for Rav that the principal is determined by the moment of the theft, whereas the secondary payments are determined from the moment that the person comes to the court? So he says this is based upon the fact that there's a verse, Amar Kra Geneva V'Chayim. It says in this pasuk, which we cited the last couple of days, which we were discussing at length, that the pasuk says, so the pasuk says the words Geneva and Chayim. So Rav says, why does the Torah say Chayim with respect to theft? It's to tell us this idea of Achiyel Karen, that we establish the principle Ke'ein Sheganav at the moment of the theft. So that's how Rav's teaching was. So it says Rav Sheshes, Amina Kinayim V'Shachiv Rav Amar Shmaita. It must have been that Rav said this, his teacher Rav said this when he was sleeping. Because if he had been awake, he never would have said such a thing. Why? The Tanya, because we learned in the Brisa, not like Rav, because the Brisa says, Kechusha V'Ishmena, that if there was an animal which was thin at the time you stole it, and then it became fat, meaning to say it was fattened up, the ox became fatter after the theft, Tashlumei Kefel v'Tashlumei Arba V'Chamisha Ke'ein Sheganav. So that means to say that you pay the kefel, the double amount, or the 4 or 5 times the amount, not at the moment of the actual theft, not at the moment that it is now, and now the ox is worth much more because it's fatter, but you go back to the time that it was stolen, and you do the value, the secondary payment based upon the value of what it was when you stole it. So this is contradicting Rav. So the Gemara says, no, that case is different. Amri mishum da amrlei ana patimna v'at shakal. That case is different because there the thief could say, I fattened it up and you're going to take it, meaning to say, I'm the one who worked on it to make it fatter. So that's not something that I should have to pay you double. I should just have to pay you the double from the time of the theft and not from the extra work that I put into it. So then the Gemara says, Tashma, Shemena V'Klisha. Let's say another proof against Rav, because let's say the animal was fat, and then the ox became thin. Misham Tashlumei Kefil v'Tashlumei Arba Chamisha Ke'ein Sheganav. Here too we say that you pay the double payment and the extra payments from the moment that you stole it. Means if the animal was at the moment that you stole it, it was worth, let's say, it was 10 pounds, or excuse me, 1,000 pounds, and now it's 500 pounds. We're going to say that you pay the double on them from the moment that you stole it, and not the moment it is now. And so that's another contradiction to Rav. Gemara says, no, that case is also different. Because the thief could say, Mali katla kula, Mali katla palga. What's the difference if you killed all of it or if you killed half of it? And Rashi's saying that the understanding here means that from the moment you started making the animal weaker, that's where you began the process of the slaughtering. And so therefore it's as though that's where the process started. And so you are really paying the kefil from the moment of where you started the slaughter. And that's how Rashi understands it. Tosfos has a big problem with it because it's possible that you could kill the animal in other ways in which you wouldn't have to pay the 4 or 5 times the amount, but that's the answer that Rashi gives. So the Gemara then says, Ki ka'ama Rav. So therefore, the Gemara says when Rav says his idea that the principle is figured out from the time of the theft, and the kefel is the time of the hamadas badin, that the restitution is the double payment is from the time you come to the court. That is only biyukra ki ka'ama Rav biyukra v'zolahu dekamar. That's only where the price of the item itself goes up and down, meaning to say there's a difference in the valuation of the item, but not in what you've done to the item itself. So the Gemara says, well, what is that referring to? Hey, Chidami, what does Rav mean by this? Ilema demei shavia zuza. If you want to say at the outset, let's say this barrel of wine that he stole was worth a zuz, ubesof shavia dalad zuz, and in the end, the same barrel of wine is worth 4 zuz, and the keren, and the principal is ke'ein sheganav, and the principal is he pays back is 1 zuz, and then if that's the case, the kefil would be double of 4 zuz. But lema pligi de Rav adarabba. If that's the case, then should we say that Rav is arguing with the statement that Rabbah made? That Rabbah says the following: Dama Rabbah, Haimban de gazel chavisa de chamra. If a person steals a barrel of wine, michavre, he steals a barrel of wine from his friend, made kora shavya zuz. If at the outset it was worth a zuz, or besok shavya dawa zuz, and in the end it was worth 4 zuz, tabra ushacha, that if the person broke it with his hands or if he drank it, then he would pay 4 times the amount. But if it broke on its own, Mishalim Zuze. But if it broke on its own, then he would pay only 1 zuz. So what's the reasoning? Why, if it broke on its own, why if he broke it would he pay 4 zuz? So therefore, under the Rashi explains that the Gemara in Bava explains that as long as it's in his status, as long as it's still in its same position, then it's as though he would have to return it then. So therefore, it's as though it's still in his possession. And so therefore, the moment he breaks it, that's the moment he steals it. But if it broke on its own, then why would he say that under that moment, if it broke on its own, then we're going to say, if it broke on its own, then he pays only 1 zuz. But if that's the case, why? He should have to pay at that time, and at that time it's at that time it's worth 1 zuz. So why are we saying? Hold on. Why is he saying that he's paying only 1 zuz? At that time, it's worth 4 zuz. So therefore, this is a contradiction against Rav. So the Gemara says, Amri kika Amar Rav. Well, no, when Rav says this teaching, that's talking about a case could go into Meikara Shavya Dalad, where at the outset it was worth 4 zuz. Besof, but in the end, Shavya Zuze. So Rav only says this halacha where at the outset it was worth 4, and then in the end it became worth 1 zuz. Karen ke'ein shegana. Then he plays the principle of the idea is he plays the principle of what it was when he stole, which was 4 zuz. Tashumi kefal tashumi arba v'chamisha kishas hamadis bedin. And then he pays the 4 or 5 times the amount at the time it was when he was brought to court, which is at the case when it was 1 zuz. That's the case where Rav says. So only if it goes down in value like that, that's where Rav says you pay the kefil according to what it's worth now. So now the Gemara says, let's bring the support for Rav from the following price. So Tani Rabbi Chanina was the Yuya Rav. So Rabbi Hanina says, let's bring a support for Rav from the following brisa. Now this was the case which we just had yesterday and the day before. So let's say the person has a pledge in a deposit in his domain, and he claims it was stolen, v'nishba, and then he takes an oath, v'hoda, and then after he takes the oath, he admits that he actually lied when he said it was stolen. He really had it in his possession the whole time. Ubo edim, and then the witnesses come. Imachol ubo edim hoda. If he admitted that he was lying before the witnesses came, then it's what's called moda b'kenas. He's admitting it. So then Mishalim Karen. So under that case, he pays the principal, the chomesh, and he brings an oath, the asham, and he has to bring a carbon asham because it's what's called an asham because he took an oath. But there's no kafel there because we say under those circumstances, the moda b'kenas is pater. If you admit to this penalty, you're going to be exempt. But Im achalo bo edim. So that's what the Bryce is saying. If before the witnesses came, he admitted it, he paid the Karen, the Chomesh, and the Asher, but no kafel. But im misha bo edim, if the witnesses came, and then then he admitted it, mishalim tashlume kafel, then he's going to pay the double amount because the witnesses came first, so he has the kafel and the carbon asham, the Chomesh. And the Chomesh works as part of his kefal payment. And this is the position of Rabbi Yaakov. Then Gemara, the Bryce is going to bring two other opinions. But before the Bryce does that, we're going to first look at the Rashi. Why does it say that the Rashi says, why does the Chomesh, the extra 1/5, which he pays in this case, count as part of his kefal? Because the extra 1/5, who does he pay it to? He doesn't pay it to a court. There's no such concept. He paid it to the owners, v'hu shakel, and so therefore the owner is taking v'shakel, and he takes this 1/5. And it must be that what Rabbi Yaakov is talking about is it must be the only way we can understand this brisa is where Rabbi Yaakov is saying that the chomesh, the extra 1/5, which is your penalty you pay for lying about your deposit and taking an oath about it, and then under those circumstances, that is the same as the kefel. Because if we're going to say that the kefel is more than the chumsha, if we're going to say that the kefil is more than the 1/5, lav chumsha havi. Then under that case, we're going to say if the kefila was more than 1/5, then we're going to say then it wouldn't be a fifth. He has to pay exactly a fifth. The komesh kapara dishvoyi, because this 1/5 is an atonement for the false oath, so it has to be exactly. That's the position of Rabbi Yaakov. Whereas the Chachamim say birosho. So according to Rabbi Yaakov, he pays the 1/5 as part of his kefil, and it must be that the 1/5 is exactly the same as the kefil. How are we going to have that? We'll see. The Gemara is going to discuss that. Whereas the Chachamim say birosho. The Chachamim say it says in the pasuk, if you or everything you take an oath falsely and you pay it birosho the chamishisav you'll say for love, meaning to say it says that he pays the principal and also he adds 1/5. And so since the pasuk says the obligation to pay the principal is the same as adding 1/5, we learn from here mamon hamishtalim berosh mosif chomesh, that the money that when a person denies the money, he pays the principal, and only when he pays the principal is he mosif the chomesh. Then he adds on 1/5. Meaning to say, if he admits it on his own, that only when he just pays the principal, and therefore he's not paying the kefel, that's where he pays the extra 1/5. Mamon she'emish time barosh, but the money where you don't just pay the principal, but you're paying more than that, i.e., you're paying a kefel or dalad b'hei, and then Mosif chomesh, and under those circumstances, you don't pay the 1/5. So that's what the Chachamim say. That in this case, you wouldn't pay the 1/5 because you're paying the kefel. Whereas Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, "Ein chomesh va'asham mishtalim b'makom sheyesh kefel." So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, not only do you not pay the chomesh when you're paying kefel, but you also don't bring the carbon asham. But anyway, we see from here, before we analyze the brisa, the Gemara says we see that this is a support for Rav. Why? Because Kotani Mias Chomsho Olelo Bikfelo. Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yaakov says that the Chomesh is going to count as his kefel, and so that means that the Chomesh is the exact amount of the kefel. Now, hey Chidami, how is that scenario possible? If you want to say from the outset it was worth that let's say the barrel he stole was worth 4 zuz, and in the end it was worth one. And so therefore, since we calculate the 1/5, what's called the fifth from external fifth, and so therefore the fifth is 1 zuz. So therefore, chumsha olo b'kfeil. So his 1/5 penalty is 1 zuz, and also the double amount, because it's worth now 1 zuz, is 1 zuz. So therefore, kfeil arba v'chumsha zuzah. So therefore, we're going to say. Excuse me, let me read again. If you want to say from the beginning it was worth 4 and then it's still worth 4, so then the chumsha, how can we say the chumsho ola b'kfelo? How can we say that the 1/5 counts as his secondary payment? Kfelo arba. In that case, the kfelo is 4 zuz, the chumsha zuza, and the chumsha is only 1 zuz. So it must be elav demikara shavya arba. That at the outset it was worth 4 zuz, ubesov shavya zuza, and in the end this barrel is only worth 1 zuz. The kfelo zuza, the chumsha zuza, that the kefel is 1 zuz and the chomesh is 1 zuz. So we see from here, Karen Kain Shaganav Tashlume Kefel. So we see from here, Karen Kain Sheganav, that the Karen is like what it was when he stole it, whereas the Tashlume Kefel and the Shumi Dal Behei Kishas and Madabedin, whereas the Kefel and the payments of 4 or 5 times the amount is what it is when you come to the court. It's exactly like Rav said. So Rav says no, that's not necessarily a proof for Rav, because Rava would say, it's possible that from the outset it was worth 4 and now it's also worth 4. So if that's the case, how can the kefel and the chomesh be exactly the same? With the kakashia, and now what you said, well, the kefel is 4 zuz and the 1/5 is only 1 zuz. No, here what we could be talking about, it's where he took the oath and he kept lying 4 times, and in the end, Hoda, and then in the end he admitted it that he swore falsely. That even though it's one principle, since you swore falsely 4 times, you end up paying the 1/5 4 times, and then it's exactly the same as the kefel, and so therefore it is possible. So the Gemara now says, since the Gemara brought the position of the Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Gemara is going to explain their positions. Amar Mar v'Chachamim Omrim Birosho v'Chamishisto. Maman Amashtarim Birosh Mosif Chomesh. Then only when there's no kefel do you pay an extra Chomesh. But Maman Sheimashtarim Birosh. But if it's not just the principle, but there's a kefel, Ein Mosif Chomesh. You don't add the 1/5. Avo Asham Maisi. But according to Chachamim, you would still bring the korban Asham if you swore falsely. So the Gemara wants to know, Maishna Chomesh Nelo Meshalim. How come, according to Chachamim, you don't pay the 1/5 in the case where you swore falsely, and you don't pay the 1/5 in the case where you pay the kefel, because it says birosho v'chamishiso. Well, if that's the case, Asham nami lo mishalim. So you shouldn't also bring the korban Asham there. Daksiv birosho v'chamishiso. So because it says in that context, because it says daksiv birosho v'chamishiso. So if that's the case, you shouldn't. You also Asham nami lo mishalim daksiv birosho v'chamishiso ve'es hashamo. So if that's the case, you shouldn't also bring the korban Asham. So Amri L'cha Rabbanan es paske kran. No, the word es separates the Asham from the Chomesh to say that even in a situation where you're bringing the kefal, you bring the korban Asham. Rabbi Shimon Yochai says the es arve kran. No, that the word es is coming to connect it and say that they're all connected. So if you don't pay the 1/5, you also don't bring the Asham. Rabbanan Amri Lachol Lichtov Rachmana Lovav V'lo Es. The Rabbanan would say to you, Rabbi Shimon, no, because if the Torah wanted to connect the korban to what was before it, then the Torah should just not have written the Vav or the Es, and it should have just said, Pirosho V'cha Sav Ashamo. So the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon Yochai Amrocha es lo sagi lo kasav. No, it needed to write the es lavsuke be mamon lagavoa and mamon hedger. No, it needed to write it to draw the distinction between the obligation of the chomesh between the carbon, which is money to God, and the chomesh, which is money to the hedgehog. Hilkach asa vav and arve cross. So therefore, the pasuk, so the Torah brings the vav to connect the verses to say that somebody who pays the extra payment still has to does not have to bring the carbon. So now the Gemara says, let's go back to Rav's position that the Tashlumi Keifo and Ara Chamisha, you pay at the value of what it was when you come to the court. So the Gemara says, well, let's bring a dispute here. I'm a Rabbi Ilah, Talav v'nasa ayo. Let's say you steal a lamb, and then it became a ram. Egel v'nasa shor. You steal a calf, and then it became an ox. Nasa shinoi biyado. So this change happened in his possession, and so therefore ukina'o. And so therefore the thief has acquired it. He still has to pay the restitution, but he's acquired the animal, so to speak. So meaning to say that any theft where the item changed, he's acquired it, and he just owes the money at that point. And so therefore, tabachu machar, so therefore if he slaughtered it or sold it once it became a ram or once it became an ox, then he does not pay the 4 or 5 times penalty. Shalom tovech, shalom mocher, because there he's slaughtering or selling his own item, and so therefore he does not, under those circumstances, pay the 4 or 5 times the amount. So Eisvei Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Ilah. So Rabbi Chanina turns to Rabbi Ilah, challenges him. It says, Ganav, from a bride says, Ganav Talav and Nasa Ayel. Let's say you steal a lamb and it became a ram, or Egel and Nasa Shor, a calf and it became an ox, Misham Tashlumi Kefa, Tashlumi Arba V'chamisha. Then you would pay double or 4 or 5 times the amount. In Shiganav, at the moment it was worth it when you stole it. And if you're going to say that he acquired it, why is he paying this amount? He's slaughtering or selling his own thing. So Amarai, so Rabbi Ilah says Rabbi Chanina. So what do you want to prove from the price? Elamai, Shinoi. Well, Kani, you want to say that he hasn't acquired it? Well, if that's the case, Amai Meshalim in Shiganav, then why is he paying at the moment that it was stolen? Lashaim Kiash, if he hasn't acquired it, let him pay for what it's worth right now. So Rabbi Chanina responds, Amalai Kihashta Hainu Taima Duo Meshalim. So Rabbi Chanina says you can't prove that the brisa is messed up because kihashta hainu time the mishalim. Why does he not pay what it's worth now? Mishum the amarei Torah gan ve'minach dichra gan ve'minach, because he would say, did I steal from you an ox? I stole from you a calf. Did I steal from you a ram? I stole from you a lamb. So Amarle, so that's where Rabbi Chanina responds. So Rabbi Ilah responds to Rabbi Chanina, Rachmana nitzlah mehai daita. Hashem should save us from this logic of yours, because if this is not considered a shinoi, this is just terrible logic. Amarle, so Rabbi Chanina responds to Rabbi Ilah, Adarabba, Rachmana nitzlah midaita today. The Torah should save us from your faulty logic. So Maskef for Rabbi Zera, so Rabbi Zera challenges this price that Rabbi Chanina taught. So even if this fact that it changed from a lamb to a ram is not considered a shino in the actual animal to acquire it, he should acquire it by the fact that it changed its name, because that should be enough to say the thief acquired it. So Amar Rava says no. Shor ben Yomo Karoi, sure, an ox 1 day old is still called an ox. Its name is not changing. Ayol ben Yomo Karoi Ayol. Ram 1 day old is called a ram. Shor ben Yomo Karoi Shor. Dichsev Shor Kesevo Eis Kivaleit. If you give his birth to an ox or a sheep or a goat. Ayol ben Yomo Karoi Ayol, because it says Ve'elei Tzoncha lo echalti. The rams of your sheep I did not eat. Elim dulo hudo achal bakvasim achal. He didn't eat the rams, but he ate the sheep. So Shmami, no, we see from here, Ayol ben Yomo Karoi Ayol. A ram 1 day old is called a ram. Nevertheless, Mikol Makom, nevertheless, Kasha, the price is difficult for Rabbi Ilah, because according to Rabbi Ilah, this change from the ram to become from the lamb to become a ram and from the calf to become an ox should exempt the thief from paying 4 times the amount. And the brisa that we learned that the ganaf is liable, and in the brisa we learned that he's liable also for the slaughter of the animal. So Amar Sheshis, Harmani, who is this author of this brisa? This is the Beis Shammai. The Amar Shinoi b'mkomo omedes v'lo kanai. This is the position of Beis Shammai, who says he hasn't actually acquired anything, but even though the thief acquires it, he hasn't acquired, even though he changes it. Titania, and we're going to cite the brisa. Not on law. That it says in the brisa, let's say the man, if a person wants to pay the harlot, He says, let's say the person who is with a harlot, he gives her in exchange for her services wheat. Va'asam soles, and then the woman turns it into flour, or zaysim va'asam shemen, olives, and she turns it into oil. Anavim, grapes, va'asa yain, and she turns it into wine. Tani chada aser, tani chada mutter. One brisa says that since it changed, you're not allowed to use it, and the other brisa says one brisa says since it changed, you're allowed to use it in the temple, and the other brisa says you're not allowed to. But Amar Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef says Tani Gurion Tamei Asporik, the Chacham whose name was Gurion, who lived in Asporik, he's the one who taught this brisa, and he says Beis Shammai Osram. Beis Shammai is the one who says that even though you changed it from wheat to flour, it still can't be used in the temple because it's the price for a harlot. Ubesil Matirin, and Beisil allows it. And the Gemara in tomorrow's daf is going to say what's the reasoning for Beis Shammai and what's the reasoning for Beisil. But we'll stop here and wish everybody Geshmak Shabbos, and we'll go over the stuff obviously on Shabbos Kodesh itself. Shkoyach. Any questions?